How to think about complicated things. You're watching Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. We always tend to think about the things that are really obvious, the things that are right in front of our face, but we don't always think about the context. We don't always think about everything else that's going on, everything else that's influencing that thing. And so we kind of get lost in what's obvious, we get lost in the distraction, and we don't think about like the grander picture, about all of the things that are going on, about everything else. The important thing to start thinking about is like the context, the environment, like where something is happening, when it is happening. Because the environment has an important influence over things. And so there's this famous plane crash, I believe it was a Korean Airlines plane crash, but they have like this sort of hierarchical culture where like older people have more respect and younger people have less respect. And so like you're not supposed to talk questioningly to someone who's older than you. And so like there is a problem with this plane, and the younger like co-pilot on the plane was the one who was observing it, but he was like afraid to challenge or go against the pilot. And because the pilot was older, like there was a sort of the cultural influence that prevented him from like doing his job correctly. The context, the environment had more influence over doing the right thing. And so it's really important to remember how much of an influence the environment has, like how much the previously existing conditions have over a situation, over an event, over something that's happening. Put another way, the way we see things or the rules that we have, even if they're like informal rules, just they have a huge influence over the way that we sort of respond to a situation. Once something happens, then ideology and politics take over. So ideology and politics is going to cloud or influence people's understanding or sense making of the things that happen around them. So let's just imagine that you have a circle and you cut it in half, or you draw a line through the middle, and then on that line you draw a little circle in the middle. And so the little circle in the middle is the event, and like the part underneath of it is the environment, and then the part above it is like the politics and ideology. And so the event, the thing that you're thinking about, is just a small part about understanding, making sense of the complicated thing. Because you have to think about the environment, you have to think about the context of where this thing happened. Then you also have to think about like the way that people make sense of it through their political perspectives, through their lenses, through their perceptions, or their like ideologies, like all of these things that influence the way that they perceive the event. In other words, the event itself becomes minimal, or becomes only a small part of like the overall sort of understanding, explanation of things. Just to sort of put this in perspective, like think about a seed. Put a seed in the ground, and the ground is the environment. The soil has certain amounts of nutrients in it. It has a certain level amount of sunlight that comes down on it. There's going to be, rain and water and then you drop the seed, and then it starts to grow. And the seed is the start of something. But then we have our perceptions or our politics or understanding of that seed. And so if it's a grass seed in the ground, then you might not care about it very much. You might not take much care of it, and it will just kind of grow and fizzle. And maybe you'll even just cut it because like you don't want grass growing there. But if it was like a tomato seed, then you might take more care of it. You might make sure that it gets some fertilizer, that it gets some water. You might pick the weeds around it, and you might take care of it until you nurture it and you grow it and you make it sort of become this like bigger thing than it was. And thinking in a different perspective, like let's think about conversation on the internet. Like lots of people might say that they believe in free speech. And so you have like this, like the seed of free speech. But like you have this environment. And what is the environment? Well, like you're on this like technological platform, and you have these big corporations that own the platforms for the most part. And so they kind of have control over the things that happen within their sort of gardens. And that creates this environment. And so when something happens, like if that thing that is happening is questioning or challenging the powers that be, maybe it's challenging or questioning the tech company, then like they have an incentive to censor, they have an incentive to control conversation or direct it or influence it. Like just say like you have a really big event, then maybe it might be in the interests of the people who control the network to control the ideas about it. Like maybe they only let one sort of opinion be traded and passed around, and any other opinion that questions that is outside of that, then those get censored. The internet is your environment, and people's ideologies, their like need to maintain power, like those are kind of like the upper part of the circle, or those are like the sort of perspectives and the ideologies that influence. And so like the event is small, the environment determines like what's possible, and then the ideologies and politics kind of direct it to where it will go. There's all these like different factors that kind of influence the way that we think about things, and we need to sort of be able to separate those. We need to understand that, okay, like part of the reason why people are responding this way to it is because of this environment, because of this context, and then at the other side of it, you have to say like, well, okay, and the reason why this conversation, this issue is going in this direction is because of these reasons. There's these influences, there's these profit motives, like there's these political ideologies that are influencing people's ways of understanding or making sense of this event, and so it's being framed in a way that has to be black and white, or it has to go in one direction or the other. And so when we're thinking about an event, all these factors have a huge influence, and they're more important than we might realize. The more that these factors become a part of it, right? The more that that we get kind of caught up in the environment, that we get caught up in the politics, that we get caught up in the ideology, then we stop talking about the actual thing. We stop talking about the event that we're trying to think about, that we're trying to make sense of, and we get stuck in maybe these polarizing or these thesis antithesis understandings of things, where we start arguing about stuff that isn't relevant anymore, that isn't actually the thing itself. These are factors that influence, thinking about things in the context of other people. And you have to use that information to sort of make sense of things for yourself when you're trying to think about something that's happened. It's important to remember that what happened is a really small factor of how everyone is making sense, how everyone is understanding it. All of these factors, they give context and they influence things, but they're also a sort of a distraction away from the event, away from the seed of what's going on. But then the other side of it is that without the context, without the environment, without the ideologies, then there is no event. How do you make sense of the event? What is the event itself? It's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. Is the event itself what matters, or is it the context? Is it the ideologies? At the same time, the event is nothing without the context. There's not much to see if you don't have this sort of context for understanding it. And so that's also an important and significant influence over the direction of things. So when you're thinking about a big event, or when you're thinking about something important, always remember that these factors are influencing it. The context has a big influence. People's ideologies or their already set up ways of thinking about things are having a huge influence over the discussion, over the dialect, over the understanding of it. And so it's important to always sort of step back and think of things as the event and as the context. And maybe you can write those things down and separate them so that you can kind of separate them in your thinking and try and separate so that they don't become distractions or hindrances over thinking about the thing that you're trying to think about. Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever sort of tried this method of looking at things? If you found this entertaining or informative, click that like button because I'd really appreciate it. If you are curious about learning how to think about things but you don't want to be told what to think about them, then click that subscribe button because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. We'll talk next time. Goodbye.